Good morning, everyone. I welcome all the participants to this online lecture series titled Productive Engagement of University Teachers and Research Scholars during COVID-19 lockdown. As you know, today is the fourth day. Now it's time for me to introduce our speaker of the day, Professor Somendra Mohan Patnaik, has served in the Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi since 1999, and he is currently the Vice Chancellor of Utkal University, Odisha. His return to Odisha after 36 years has brought out transformative changes in Utkal University, as most of you must be aware of. He has been a Fulbright Nehru Visiting Fellow at the University of Virginia 2011 and also visiting professor at University of California, Berkeley 2013. His area of expertise includes globalization, development and tourism study, indigenous knowledge, tribal study, last but not the least, ethnography. He has been the advisor to Government of Nagaland on sustainable tourism development policy and has been a co-founder of Anthropology Without Boundaries, an academic body committed to interdisciplinary research in 4 countries, namely India, South Africa, Brazil, and United States. Professor Patnaik was the editorial board of Indian Anthropologist. In fact, he is the chief editor, published by Indian Anthropological Association, and he is the president of Indian Anthropological Association, and was the editor of Research Proceeding in Anthropology, published by the University of Delhi. He has conducted fieldwork in Nepal, Sri Lanka, Eastern and Central India, and Nagaland. He has authored 4 books and published more than 40 research articles in internationally reputed journals. He is shoulder of the responsibility of taking the sole A+ university of the state to greater glory. And today, Professor Somendra Mohan Patnaik will speak on ethical issues in research and teaching in higher education. With this brief introduction, I would like to invite Professor Patnaik to deliver his lecture. Professor Patnaik, it's your time.
Good morning, everybody. I think it's a great occasion, and I am extremely thankful to my esteemed colleague, Vice Chancellor of Sambalpur University, Professor Deepak Behera, for having conceived this idea, which is a historic idea in the higher education practices and higher education experiences in India. I think this would be regarded as one of the best practices as far as the state of Odisha is concerned, out of many. I could see some of my colleague vice chancellors. They are here. Professor Das, the vice chairperson, Odisha Higher Education Council, Professor Patra, Professor Madhumita Das, and many other vice chancellors, and also many other professors whom I could recognize, and the young, curious, and inquisitive students and research scholars. Now, my focus will be on the ethical issues in teaching and research in higher education. Let me ask you by raising one fundamental question. Suppose somebody tells you that he will deliver a lecture on ethical issues in spirituality, ethical issues in spiritual practice. The whole topic collapses, because the moment you talk of spiritualism, the question of ethics is inbuilt into that. There is no unethical practice if you are a practicing spiritualist. Now go back to 200 years. Before 200 years, if this question will be raised to any teacher, any of our great-grand teachers, that what are the ethical issues in the profession of teaching, I think he would laugh at it. He would say that the very profession of teaching is not a profession. It is a style of life, and ethics is built into it. If you cease to be an unethical person, you cease to be a teacher. So, a premise which has acquired greater meaning now. Let us find out what are the factors that has contributed to such a kind of situation. I think the neoliberal economy has something to contribute to this particular phenomenon, to this particular narrative which we are discussing, that what is the ethical concerns of teaching and research in higher education. In the neoliberal economy, education has become a product, and education is being given through a relationship of market. And when it is given in a relationship of market, more predominantly, I'm not talking of the public universities, they are still devoid of that detrimental trend. But in most of the private universities, and especially more so in the Western countries, education has become a commodity, and education has become a product which comes to the person through the market relationship. And therefore, the ethics of such a quote-unquote business, the ethics of quote-unquote such a profession has come into discussion. In any case, my lecture, my presentation will revolve around 4 important domains. First, I would try to tell our young scholars that what is the concept of ethics? What is a philosophy of ethics? We should understand, because any attempt to understand any concept should not be limited to the books. If we understand a concept by reading 4 printed lines from the book, we get chained by that particular idea. We cannot get intellectual emancipation. Let us question. Let us find out what is the topic of ethic. The concept of ethic tells us. When we discuss this whole idea of ethics, it refers to that branch of philosophy which deals with rules of human conduct from a moral point of view. Ethics addresses the issue of morality. But the question comes up whether ethics and morality are synonymous. I would like to bring out a fine difference between ethics and morality, because ethics is mutually understood, is mutually existing. Many of the philosophers have said that there is no ethics without the other. It has to be understood in relation to other. But when it comes to morality, any relationship beyond the mutuality or beyond the dyadic relationship could have a moral component. And this difference between ethics and morality is something which we should keep in mind, because this is an important dimension of our understanding of the concept. Let us make it more practical. Let us bring it to a ground level. And if we bring it to a ground level, we will find that the stakeholders that are involved in educational institutions, the stakeholders need to be ethical first. The teachers, the officers, the staff member, the guardians, the students. And when the stakeholders are becoming ethical, then the system which they develop and the practice which they follow are expected to be ethical. And the model which they develop are expected to be ethical. Now, what do you mean by being ethical? what is that which tells us when should we become ethical? Ethical addresses a kind of decision making, a kind of judgment of your own behavior, judgment of your own practices in terms of good, bad, right and wrong, virtue and vices. And this judgment, which we are continuously making, is an important process in the ethical considerations. And this decision-making process is primarily important in the educational institutions because academicians are expected to exhibit higher degree of professionalism and ethical code of conduct because they preach ethical code of conduct and they profess the ethical values, and therefore they themselves must be a model of that very responsibility, and that responsibility which has taken care of reproducing the next generation of the society, which has taken care of the individual's well-being, which has taken care of the credibility of public institutions and the public trust. And therefore, it is very, very important that the higher education practitioners must exhibit higher component of ethical commitment. Who is an ethical teacher? Campbell in 2003 talked of how ethics can contribute to the professional enrichment. She is of the opinion, Campbell is of the opinion, that ethical knowledge can provide the basis for a renewed professionalism in teaching. So what is the ethical practices in teaching? This is my second domain. After understanding what is an ethics, let us go to the second domain, how to practice it in terms of teaching. An ethical teacher is one who makes classroom very, very democratic. A classroom has to be democratic in the sense, no question should be ridiculed, no question should be brushed aside, no question should be ignored, and no question should be used to intimidate the students. And it is only in a democratic atmosphere the classroom provides an environment conducive for learning, an environment which encourages the learning. The teacher has to evaluate the learning outcomes very, very fairly. I remember when Amartya Sen got the Nobel Prize, he was referring to his teacher who had given Sukhamaya Chakravarti, the famous economist, one number difference than him. And the teacher explained to them why he gave one number difference. One was more textbookish and the other one was more innovative. A teacher judges, evaluates in a very, very fair way. And though judgment comes to the limelight long after 20 years and 30 years, a decision which a teacher has made, becomes time tested. And that brings out credibility to most of these Ivy League universities and most of these premier universities of the world, that it is owned up by the practitioners, by the academic leaders. And the third point in this teaching practice is, an ethical teacher is one who treats the subject or the students very, very respectfully. Now, there are different mechanisms of understanding the student and teacher relationship. This is a very, very sacred profession where the students are not different from teachers. If I say that the students are not different from teachers, do I mean to say that they are at the same level of understanding, same level of maturity, and same level of knowledge acquisition and knowledge production? Certainly not. They are same because one can become the other. The students has the potential and they have the promises of becoming like the teacher or even surpassing the teacher. A student and teacher relationship is just a relationship of time and space. A teacher has traveled the same path 20 years before, 5 years before, or 10 years before, or 1 year before, and the student would be traveling that path after a few years. So it is like teaches the like nurtures the like. It's not unlike nurtures the like. You are not making something which is unlike you. You are making something which is like you. And this like and unlike, or this kind of duality, brings out deeper questions on ethics. Ethical teaching means engaging in behavior that are expected by students, institutions, and disciplines. Every discipline has certain amount of expectation from its practitioners. Let us come up to the expectations of our discipline. What does political science expect from us? What does biotechnology expect from us? Expectation doesn't mean that a binding. Expectation means that an indication for a pathways. And in that indication, if a teacher has understood, that indication will open up new pathways for higher research. Ethical teaching means understanding the expectations of the institutions. After discipline, I would say understanding the expectations of the institutions. Unfortunately, institutions are places where there are very few owners to take up the responsibility. And these ownership of institutions, an academic ownership, a temporal ownership, an intellectual ownership of these institutions by the stakeholders is an important linkage with the ethical teaching. And finally, it is the students who are having their own expectations, and they have their expectations from the teacher. One can say that what is the end product of these student-teacher relationship? I will tell you, one of my teachers who retired from the University of Delhi, and on the day of retirement, I asked him, "Sir, can you tell me one line advice to the students on your last day of retirement, on the last day of your service?" And the professor said, he smiled at me, he said, that, "Look, Somendra, after 40 years of teaching, I have realized in my life that nothing can be taught." What does it mean? If you say nothing can be taught, there is also acknowledging the fact that the light of knowledge, the flame of knowledge, the flame of wisdom is continuously burning in each one of us. The way Tagore said, a true teacher is one who is still learning himself. A candle cannot burn another candle unless it is burning its own flame. So there is a light, there is a candle, there is a inquisitiveness in all of us. And a teacher, the role of a teacher has to guide, has to direct, has to indicate, has to show the pathways of right kind of mannerisms and methodology for knowledge acquisition. But the final acquisition has to be done by the student themselves. And therefore, treating students as persons, not treating students by the roll number. Roll number 21, you listen, "Yes, sir," and you don't raise your head and look at who is that 21, and you just put absent or present. There has to be a personification of the students, because every student is different from every other student. I have realized that the student-teacher relationship is very, very tricky one. Let me tell you one example how it can be very tricky. Most of the students who are bright, who are reflective, who are critical, they would come up with innovative questions to the teacher. And the teacher requires a kick. A teacher requires a jerk, intellectual jerk. A teacher is questioned. And therefore, a teacher falls into the trap of engaging more with the intellectual students, with the intelligent students. And there he or she commits an error, because he or she is not meant only for the intelligent students. He or she is meant for the last bench, the last person, the most marginalized, the most struggling student, and teacher has to reach out to them. Because the mutuality between self and other, the intellectual self of the teacher would look for more gratification by engaging more with intelligent students. And that may look very, very ethical. That may look very, very intellectually stimulating. But I would disagree there, that you should not give all time. You should not invest all your energy there, because they are capable and they give you a kind of aesthetics of learning. They give you a kind of blissful learning. But reach out to those and find out how they are unable to cope up with the studies. Ethical teaching means avoiding those actions and also inactions that may cause students educational and emotional harm. Teachers are capable of performing actions. Teachers are capable of performing inactions. If your inaction is causing educational, emotional harm to the student, that is not considered as an ethical. A PhD, the chapters of the PhD thesis is lying with you for 6 months, and you are unable to do it, or you are not doing it because that is not your priority, is something which is regarded as very, very unethical. Finally, to wind up this domain or this section, which deals with ethics in teaching, one of the authors, philosophers, educational philosophers, Murray, has identified some of the ethical principles in university teaching. What are the parameters of ethical principles of university teaching? Competence in delivering the course content, number one. Number two, the pedagogical competence, whether you are able to develop a kind of pedagogy which the students are liking it. Some of the pedagogies are through storytelling. Some of the pedagogies are through discussion of narratives. Some of the pedagogies are through PowerPoint, through visuals, through videos. You must sustain the interest of the student by inventing new pedagogies. And these new pedagogies are highly important, because this is one of the important principles of ethical teaching. Now look at the ancient wisdom of India. In Taittiriya Upanishad, which deals with the pedagogy of teaching, in the morning, the teacher, the master, will recite few couplets. And those couplets, he will not explain. The whole day, the disciple will continuously brood over it, think over it, sleep over it, apply it, meditate it. And in the evening, he would come back with his own understanding, and the discussion will follow. What is your understanding? What is other disciples' understanding? And what is the understanding of the Guru? Look at the way most of you are so well versed with the Western system of education. Look at the way most of the American universities teach. They prescribe the textbooks, the students read the textbooks, and students come to the class to ask questions. They don't come to the class to listen to the summary of the textbooks which teacher makes. That takes us to a second level of student-teacher relationship. That student-teacher relationship is more critical, more reflective, more creative, and therefore more stimulating and exciting. This has to deal with the pedagogical thing. Third point under these principles, dealing with sensitive and discomforting topics. Now, some of the topics are very, very discomforting, and especially I'm talking about across the gender. Some of the topics, one of the genders may not be very comfortable with, and therefore one has to be very careful in dealing with the topics which may not discomfort the students in the classroom. At the same time, a teacher should avoid interfering personally into the student's relationship and private life. And such an interference is always regarded as unsolicited interference, and unsolicited interferences are never welcome. A teacher should always maintain the confidentiality of the examination system. For example, we may be very close to our supervisor. A supervisor may be very critical of your work, of your PhD dissertation, but when the report comes, he is tight-lipped about the questions which the external examiner has asked. And he is so tight-lipped that I have realized that when my external examiner came, the external examiner was omitting one of the reports and one set of questions asked by one of the examiners. My supervisor realized him, reminded him, look, there is a third set of questions, and please feel free to ask this third set of questions. These are the teachers who have maintained their ethics and their confidentiality. Teacher has to also respect the colleagues. You cannot criticize your colleagues and expect the student to respect you. If you criticize your colleagues, because your colleague is like you, and the moment you criticize your colleagues, the students are intelligent enough to understand that how insecure you are, how inconfident you are, and therefore you are criticizing. There is always a practice among the research scholars. Most of the research scholars must be listening to me. There is a practice in most of the universities that research scholars will come and talk only to the guide. I think it's a very ridiculous practice that research scholars should come and talk only to the guide, and other teachers do not exist for the research scholars. That is a very insecure practice. When I started supervising my PhD students, I realized that some of the statutes and ordinances say that there has to be an advisory committee for the PhD student. The research supervisor is the convener, is the chair of the advisory committee, and 2 members have to be there guiding the students. And remember, many of you must be guiding the students and supervising the PhD thesis. Please constitute an advisory committee, because the advisory committee will be very helpful to you, not only in generating new kinds of ideas for which you will take the credit as supervisor, not only for generating, of course, with acknowledgement, you will acknowledge those ideas, but at the time of crisis, they will act as a shock absorber, because you are continuously transparent in the eyes of your advisory committee members. But if there are some kind of misunderstanding between you and your student, then these are essentially shock absorbing mechanisms, and mechanisms which produce new kinds of knowledge set. Now, coming to the third component of my lecture, which deals with the research. Now, what are the ethical issues in research practices as far as higher education is concerned? We all know that ensuring the protection of human participants in a research process is very important, because 4 components give greater importance to it. The first component is as far as the human subject. I'm not very comfortable to use the word subject, but human informants are involved or human stakeholders are involved. The 4 components are very important. Consent of the respondent, the capacity of the respondent, capacity in terms of intellectual, economic, social, from the point of view of time, from the point of view of energy, and the nature of information which you are seeking, and voluntariness. Consent, capacity, nature of information, and degree of voluntariness determine the ethical practices in higher research, because when research is in action, one must very careful to ensure that there is no harm caused to the respondent. The privacy of the respondent is well maintained, and the respondents are not deceived. Deception should not be there. Privacy should not be leaked out, and harm should not be ensured, or harm should be avoided. I remember when I was doing my PhD, I met one of the senior IAS officers who was the Chief Secretary of Odisha, of Odisha long ago. And when I met him, I was just pass out from my MSc. The first thing which he said 30 years ago, or maybe 40 years ago, he said that, look, as an anthropologist, you have greater freedom to write whatever you can feel like to write, but try to maintain the intellectual honesty. The intellectual honesty will take you to the highest position, because your readings, your writings will be continuously evaluated, and it is only that your understanding of the other, which is the core of anthropological practice, will help you to reach the highest pinnacle only when you maintain your intellectual integrity and intellectual honesty. And therefore, maintaining ethical high standards in quantitative and qualitative data is an important consideration of the researchers. Many a times, the researchers are inclined. I was discussing with some of my colleagues in Utkal University from the Department of Psychology, and the point which came up, that most of the students, they try to follow a conformist attitude, that if they have taken a hypothesis, they should ensure that it is proved in one way or other. But that's not the case. If the hypothesis is not proved, be intellectually honest and say that the hypothesis is not getting proved if it is a hypothesis testing study, because it is only your inner voice, it is only the data which creates that inner voice, quantitative data, statistical data, or qualitative research, that is more important than the outcome. That kind of frankness, that kind of honesty has to be there. Research scholars also know that these days there are institutional review board, and this is primarily to monitor ethics in research. Various universities, it is mandatory to have an institutional review board or an apex ethics committee, a committee for ethical considerations of proposals, which has members from legal practitioners, NGOs, civil rights activities, gender specialists, professors, medical specialists, and they ensure that the research is not causing intervention into the human life, into the human personality, into the human body, and it is based on an informed consent, a properly articulated informed consent. And therefore, understanding the monitoring processes is very important for the research scholars. They should not just leave it aside that, okay, institutional review board is there or ethical committee is there, it will certify and I am happy and they are happy. Don't take it as a routinized process. Take it as a process which is going to be more stimulating, intellectually stimulating, intellectually rewarding, because unless you have cleared your research through these mandatory or regulatory bodies, your international publication will be marred completely, because most of the prestigious journals, they insist that and most of the donor agencies, they insist that it has to pass through institutional review board. Coming to ethics and professionalism in research, we know that there has to be absolute integrity during execution of the research project. And once the research project is executed, there has to be absolute integrity related to publications. Plagiarism test is an precondition for maintaining integrity. The things which human beings could not do, the machine is doing it now. I remember that long ago, I wrote an article on patriarchy among the Parja, and that was containing some of the oral poetry of the tribe, which was more popular, and other authors have published it. I have acknowledged those authors in the footnote, but one of the famous professors, who was also a former vice chancellor, Professor Shyama Charan Dubey, did not reach the footnote or endnote. He read it from the first line of those poetry and said, "These are the poetries which are written by so-and-so." I said, yes, that has been acknowledged at the later part. But look at the kind of intellectual depth of those scholars who could read a sentence and say that this is the sentence of this particular author, and that is existing as an imprint in their mind. I was fascinated by some of the remarks which professors of sociology in Delhi School of Economics would put. I never studied sociology in Delhi School of Economics, but some of my friends, my hostel friends, they would come back, and if they have borrowed one particular sentence from Durkheim, one particular sentence from Marx or Weber, the professor will write, this particular sentence does it belong to you or it belongs to somebody else? Those were the depth of the professors who could easily say that this sentence, the student cannot say it, this is somebody else's sentence. And that is where, when we have not been able to handle that, the machine is doing it more clearly and more articulately. Plagiarism test is a must, and that should be maintained with absolute integrity. Another point is simultaneous submission is unethical. You submitted 2 journals, and both the journals, without knowing that it has been submitted elsewhere, they bring out in a sequence. One is published in September, the other one is published in December, or you do minor tweaking and publish it at some other places. That is highly unethical, and therefore the research scholars, especially the budding scholars, must maintain absolute integrity as far as the ethical issues in authorship is concerned, because ethics is something which determines the highest level of professionalism in higher education and higher research. So to sum up, the research component as far as the ethical debate or ethical expectations are concerned, I would say that ethics in teaching and research refers to understanding those theories and conceptual framework pertaining to good or evil, right or wrong, whereas morality refers to actual world beliefs and practices. So one is the conceptual studies, the other one is the actual one. Are you doing morally acceptable research practices? Finally, the 4th component, I would come back to the first one. And the first one is that how ethics is to be understood in terms of an individual. You are first an individual. Individual as a teacher, individual as a researcher, or individual as a student. And therefore, when we talk about ethics, we say that, I will quote one of the famous philosophers of 20th century, Michael Foucault. Now, Michael Foucault is of the opinion that technology of the self, there are certain technologies available to be applied to the self, so that the care of the self and practices of the self develops into a greater understanding of ethical selfhood. What Foucault is trying to say, that there are, in simple language, what Foucault is trying to say, that there are methods and techniques available to us through which we constitute ourselves, we create ourselves, and these are mechanisms of society, these are mechanisms of socializations, and these are all tools through which human beings constitute themselves. And we are perpetually engaged in processes whereby we define ourselves, we produce our own ethical self-understanding. And when we produce our own ethical self-understanding, that is something which we hold about ourselves. Now, when we feel that whether I am an ethical person or not, who will certify it, whether I am an ethical person or not? It is me, my inner self, who will certify that yes, you are an ethical person. And therefore, the connectedness to the self, the connectedness to your own self, is an important dimension of ethical constitution. How you connect yourself to the inner self, and also the connectedness to the other, how others perceive you. And therefore, ethics, as far as an individual is concerned, as far as a stakeholder of higher education is concerned, is all about a relation to self and a relation to other. And therefore, it is very difficult to know, and thus the only commonality is ethical questions are based on a premise of difference. As we have already argued, that there is no ethics without the presence of other. But Immanuel Kant would say that there is an interiorized, universal, altruistic ethic in individuals. And this interiorized, universal, altruistic ethics is all about a moral imperative of freely choosing what is right, not because of anything, but solely because it is right. We are choosing something as right because it is right. And that is the interiorized, universal, altruistic ethics. And finally, we can say that ethical issues are important in higher education today because of the neoliberal economy, which has created a disjunction between morality, ethics, teaching, and market. When we talk about the ethical dilemmas, we all know that there are situations which I will take up during the question and answer time. There are situations where a field worker is continuously in dilemma, or there are situations when a life science researcher is continuously in dilemma. And those dilemmas are resolved by taking decisions, and those decisions are based on ethical considerations, which define the self-understanding of the researcher and which define the self-understanding of the other. And that is where the ethical guidelines are important. The final point with which I would like to conclude and invite questions is whether a universal ethical guideline is possible as far as life science research, social science research, or other types of philosophical research is concerned. Simpson in 2011 came up with a very interesting concept. He distinguished between ethics of the body and ethics of the person. Ethics of the body with a person attached to it. Ethics of the body, I repeat, ethics of the body with a person attached to it, and ethics of the person with a body attached to it. The first one is adopted by the conventional practice of human subject research, mainly those who are dealing with the human body. But the concept of person is attached. Concept of person come as a epiphenomenon. And the second one is ethics of the person, which is mainly done by the social science research, where the body is an epiphenomenon and body comes in as an attachment. And this distinction is very central for understanding any universal guideline of ethical conduct. Is it possible? And with this question I will end. Is an ethical guideline at the level of the whole world possible? I still do not know the answer, because I can tell you both the perspective, because every context is different, every culture is different, every nation is different, every continent is different, and therefore the ethical considerations have to be situated in the context. But the second perspective is that there are certain universal values of humanity, and there are certain universal values of formation of the whole world, the whole cosmic order, the dharma, how it is upholding the whole cosmos. So there are certain universal principles of holding on to the whole universal metrics, and therefore universal guidelines are possible. In 1948, when the universal guidelines for human rights were formulated, people had similar debate that whether a universal guideline of human rights can be attained. But they were able to do it because of the cooperation of the nations. And thus, my conclusion is whether the universal ethical guidelines are necessary or possible, whether they are desirable or feasible, only the time will say, because most of the agencies like ICSSR, ICMR, and the animal rights research organizations, they are coming up with their own guidelines determining the code of conduct for adopting ethical practices in research. Thank you very much. Thank you all and all.
Professor Patnaik, first you need to be congratulated for this wonderful brainstorming lecture. It's an eye-opener for many of us. But the question before it goes to the moderator, I would just like to raise one question which you may answer after the moderator speech is over. So why, I understand that this is a very important issue, but why in university level teaching, we don't put that much of emphasis to ethical standard, ethical issues, and why students, research scholar, and even the students are not given exposure, why that has been not made part of our curriculum. And that is why probably many of these scholars, they suffer and they enter to the field without knowing the ethics, ethical consideration. And what is your response? And rightly said, I would like to support your first tense, that it is based on time and space constraint. The second one, okay, there are some human values, that's a different issue. But as anthropologist, you are also an anthropologist, and we feel that what is ethical for me may be unethical, what is moral for me may be immoral for you. So it is definitely, it has to be contextualized, and every university, my feeling that this should be made an integral part of the course curriculum. And now with this brief comment, I would like to hand over the Google Meet to our orator.
Thank you, Professor Patnaik, for this wonderful, reflective and thought-provoking lecture, which has generated, in fact, many questions, but I'll take up the questions a little later. Well, as you have very rightly said, that teaching is now an ethical art, although ethics was pretty much integral to teaching, and it was self-evident. But the neoliberal economy is now predicated upon this knowledge economy, where ethics therefore becomes a very important issue in the wake of which, in the wake of this kind of a knowledge economy. Now, you talked about various concepts of ethics and very rightly differentiated between morality and ethics. Then you moved on to the ethical virtues and practices, with the question, who is an ethical teacher? And you talked about what should be the practices to be ethical in not just teaching, but also research. Then you talked about ensuring enrollment of various human resources. You talked about the regulatory bodies like the Students' Advisory Body and Institutional Review Board. And then you talked about professionalism, research, moved on to Michel Foucault and Kant. Well, we have a few questions now. Let's begin with a very fundamental question by, as neoliberal economy is going to stay, should we have a code of conduct for academicians like we have codes of conduct for doctors and lawyers? This is a question put by Professor Ashoka Das.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question raised by Professor Das. I would like to say that this is a suggestion, and in the light of the neoliberal economy coming up more and more rigorously, and the private universities are coming up as the great competitors for the public universities, it is very, very important that we must have codes of conduct for the teachers, the way we have it for other professional bodies like medicine and other such institutes. So this is something which has to be started, I think, right on time. This is the right time, because this will make us aware of our own rights and responsibilities, and this will also make the other stakeholders aware of the rights and responsibilities. I would like to add one point here, which has some policy implications in higher education. When we discuss about higher education, we discuss about three components or two components. Initially, we were discussing about two components. One component, the student, the other component, the teacher. Very recently, our higher education minister, Honorable Minister Dr. Arun Kumar Sahu, when he encouraged the Utkal University to celebrate the Platinum Jubilee, he advised us to stay connected to the students' parents. So a triad was formed: parents, teacher, and students. That was a new experiment. Even then, there is a fourth component which we have not been able to take care of. The fourth stakeholder are the bureaucracy within the university. I'm not talking of the bureaucracy at the level of the state, but the bureaucracy within the university, the subordinate bureaucracy. They need to be sensitized about this whole issue of ethics in higher education, because they are important stakeholders. And I take Professor Das' suggestion that while formulating a code of conduct for the teachers, I think a code of conduct should be formulated for all stakeholders who are building these institutions of higher learning, rather than making it confined only to the teachers. The second question I would like to take up, which Professor Behera a very, very relevant question and suggestion. Many of us know that last few months back, 2-3 months back, UGC has given a circular, and UGC has formulated a 4-credit course on ethical issues at the level of higher research. And in that 4-credit course, which can be an important component in the coursework, and we have done it in Utkal University, that this 4-credit course deals with all those aspects which Professor Behra is talking about, that why not study ethics as a credit course, especially when we deal with the research level students at the level of MPhil and PhD. It is only when we start talking about ethics, only then a discourse can emerge, only then a narrative can emerge, and that narrative is grossly missing from the contemporary state universities. And this narrative needs to be clear cut, and they need to be handled very efficiently.
Here is a very pertinent question, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. As teachers are statutorily not permitted to question or criticize government policies, how can intellectual honesty as an ethical virtue be inculcated in the teachers when they don't have the basic freedom to question government's education policy? How do you react to this?
I think when we talk about the criticism, long ago Chanakya has said that never criticize your enemy, because if you criticize your enemy, the enemy will learn from it. You criticize your friend, and a friendly criticism is always welcome. A person who wants to self-actualize, a criticism should reach the right kind of stakeholder. A criticism should not go to the media. A criticism should not come in terms of a public statement. If you are not happy with particular kind of system, you inform the highest officer in the government, and I'm pretty sure it will be received with welcome mind, because all of us at this level are committed to improve the system. So criticism doesn't mean that you don't talk to the government, you don't listen to the government's point of view, you don't listen to the policymakers' point of view, you simply go to the media. Those kind of freedom is never allowed, and those kind of freedom should always be curtailed, because that is not the criticism from a constructive point of view. That is a criticism for the sake of criticism. And I think autonomy is a double-edged weapon. When we say that we need to have autonomy, autonomy cannot come to us without responsibility. If we are claiming autonomy, that autonomy is based on an intellectual rigor. That autonomy is based on an intellectual commitment. That autonomy is not that I am a teacher and I can say anything and get away with it.
This question, and there's another question by Professor Tanupati. What kind of ethics is involved in Eklavya model of learning?
When you talk about Ramayana and Mahabharata, when we talk about Treta and Dwapar, Eklavya is a story from the Dwapar era, and Ramayana is in the Treta era. And Satya, Treta, Dwapar, and the Kali, the shade of ethical practices are changing. And when these shades of ethical practices are changing, when we say that teachers, those who are committed to a particular cause, they have taken a decision which may not be considered as ethical from an alternative point of view. And therefore, when I say that ethics is not universal, ethics is interactive. It is mutual. So, Eklavya model of practicing the student-teacher relationship is based on this multiple interpretation of reality, and this multiple interpretation of reality is never absolutely white. It is always in the shade of gray, and in this shade of gray, different connotations, different meanings, and different attributes can come up.
So there are a couple of questions which you can take together because they seem to be related. First, is higher education scenario in Odisha deficient in ethical component of teaching? This is one. And the other, when education is getting privatized, how ethical issues can be addressed, as all stakeholders want the outcomes to be in their own expected ways.
When we talk about higher education in Odisha, I think one of the important component is what are the public expectations from higher education. When the expectations of the stakeholders, the parents, what do they expect? They expect that they have sent the students in safe hands, and they expect that the students should become Manisha Pari Manisha Tiye, like a human being, and also should be able to earn more and more with the passage of time. So this expectation, the parental expectation, has to be kept in mind. The second point which comes up here is that the competition from the private universities, the private universities are catering more to a particular economic class, and the public universities are catering more to the intelligent students and also the rurally and socially marginalized communities. I could see one of the questions from my desktop in the messages, which connects to this whole issue, that classrooms are culturally heterogeneous, culturally diversified in public universities. And therefore, a teacher doesn't know how to deal with students who are coming from different cultural background, different socioeconomic status of the society. And therefore, a private university and a public university, the difference is in the level of sensitivity. The private universities will treat everybody as equal because they have given the equal fees. They have given the equal reciprocation. But the public universities, the teachers are sensitive to the diversity in the socioeconomic strata, the difference in the capacity to learn, the difference in the cultural background, and therefore there is a strong role of the tutorials. We do not have the tutorial system very much in place. A lecture discussion or a classroom lecture is more or less, even though it is dialogical, more or less it revolves around the syllabus. A syllabus-centric classroom is what the general classrooms are. But if we enter into a tutorial classroom, the tutorial classrooms are student-centric classrooms. So these two experiences need to be cultivated within the four walls of the classroom. The same classroom becomes a syllabus-centric classroom, that is a general lecture, and the same classroom becomes a tutorial classroom, which is a student-specific classroom. So the competition which the private universities are giving to the public universities are rather conducive that the public universities do much better for the expectations of the parents, the parental expectations, the stakeholders' expectations. And this is where we should take it as an opportunity rather than as a challenge or rather than as a limitations. And we can brand it, we can highlight it, we can market it. That is where we are not doing it. Branding is desirable, but marketing with the minimum prices is also not bad.
Yes. In that case, sir, what is your response to someone's observation that contemporary higher education scenario in Odisha is deficient in ethics?
I don't think that higher education in Odisha is deficient in ethics. It might be deficient in discussing about ethics, but it is not deficient in terms of the practices connecting to ethics. And that is what I began, that a great grand old teacher would laugh at it, that we are discussing ethical issues in teaching because it makes no sense to him. And I think in Odisha, we still hold that image of a teacher, that a teacher is one who is highly ethical and highly committed. And that is why the autonomy has been given to universities, that Odishan universities are known for many of the best practices. And I think we may not be discussing about ethics, but we are ethical as far as the core of teaching, research, evaluation, and interaction is concerned.
I was very interested to know a little about this Michel Foucault, because I've been reading Foucault for quite some time, and also Kant. But there is a basic difference between these two philosophers. Kant, as we know, is a subjectivist, a transcendental subjectivist, and as far as his ontology is concerned, well, ethics is a very strong component of his ontology. But Foucault becomes a little problematic because he's a post-humanist thinker, and the technology of self, which you were talking about, in fact, are the technologies controlled by the state. And the subject, as you know, is a product of discourses which are not under his control. There, how would you find or define an element of ethics in Foucauldian discourses which you have been talking about?
See, I would like to argue that what is under our control and what is not under our control, by citing the distinction between, or by taking you to Maslow's need theory. And Maslow's need theory will explain this contradiction which is being raised as far as Immanuel Kant and Michel Foucault is concerned. I totally agree with the point which you proposed, that that they are state-sponsored, and that is what Foucault connects it to the governmentality, the whole idea of governmentality, and absolutely getting disrobed of the individual agency, and how the subjects, citizens become the subjects, and there is a control over the population. Well taken. I mean, I agree. There is no dispute about it. But what I'm trying to say here is that there are certain areas, some of the areas of our own self are controlled by the state, and some of the areas of our own self are not controlled by the state. And this dialectics between the different terrains of the self, no single philosopher can help us to understand, because the philosopher has its own strength and limitations. Let us understand Maslow's need theory, because many of the research scholars are there. The last two needs are N-affiliation and self-actualization. Now, there is also, I'm forgetting the name of the philosopher here, but the philosopher has distinguished between primary gratification and the secondary gratification. Now, what is a secondary gratification? The need for affiliation is secondary gratification. And self-actualization is primary gratification. I will explain what is primary gratification and what is secondary gratification. Secondary gratification is when we want to move up in the eyes of other. Suppose I have tweeted something, I'm not there in the Twitter. Suppose I have tweeted something, and if I receive 2,200 likes, then I'm gratified because my statement holds good in the eyes of 2,200 persons. That is called the secondary gratification. But when we come to primary gratification, it is important what I think about myself. There is no Twitter, there is no Facebook, there is no like, there is no somebody leaving the group. I am the judge of my own self, and that is how I self-actualize. So the self-actualization, what the Western scholars have talked about self-actualization, the Indian philosophers have talked about the self-realization. And the moment you realize the self, the moment you realize that you are continuously judging yourself or you are assessing yourself, that is primary gratification. And that is invoking the sense of inner aesthetics, and the need affiliation is the sense of social aesthetics. The N affiliation or secondary gratification is the social aesthetics, and the self-actualization is the inner aesthetics. Now coming to those areas which are controlled by the individual and coming to those areas which are controlled by the state. Now, there could be many areas of my personal movement. There could be many areas of my personality which are controlled by the state. But there are certain areas of my personalities which are not controlled by the state. Look at Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi said that you could imprison my body. You could put me in the jail, but you cannot jail my spirit. You cannot put my human spirit behind the bars. You cannot jail my mind. You cannot block my mind. I'm an independent thinker. Let me think the way I want to think. Let me do the way I want to do. You can control my body, but you cannot control my mind. You cannot control my spirit. And that is something which we should keep it in our mind, that every time, and that is something which maybe Foucault missed out. That is something which Foucault missed out because in Foucauldian sense, everything is state controlled and everything is controlled by the government and governmentality. But there is something called the human spirit, and that human spirit is indomitable, which Sri Aurobindo has also said. I could see Professor Ishan Patra, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of of Ravenshaw University, sitting here, and behind him there are photographs of the mother and Sri Aurobindo. I could see, and I'm reminded of Sri Aurobindo's statement about this, the journey through inner terrains and the journeys after journeys and layers after layers of the consciousness, where he is encountering the self and the union with the self. And that is where you don't exist, you cease to exist. A new kind of realization comes up. And that is something which Foucault has missed out. Foucault did not talk. Gandhi has tried to do it. Gandhi has gone up to a part of it. But Sri Aurobindo's spiritual dwelling in the inner journey is marvelous. And thank you, Professor Patra, for reminding me of such an important clue, which helped me in giving this answer.
The technology of self, which you were talking about, or Foucault was talking about, in fact, is a legacy of the Greek academy. You know, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, wonderful, link of teacher, disciple, and disciple. And Plato had his own, famous academy. Socrates was the, was the center. And they, in fact, from Foucault's point of view, were developing the right kind of technology of self. Now, I would, this is my request to throw some light on the ethical issues in Plato's academy. I think we need to talk about the
I think that will take us to a terrain entirely different from what we are discussing now, because that would be too much of a transgression. So my question or my answer to this question would be that we have used those concepts from Foucault and Kant and Gandhi and Sri Aurobindo, which make sense to weave the whole text, the whole presentation in a meaningful way, rather than entering into an intellectual biography or genealogy of the authors. We are not entering into that. We are talking about only those aspects which has helped us to develop this particular argument.
Thank you.
Professor Patnaik, I would like to ask you maybe the last question. Do you mean to say that, there was no ethics maybe 40, 50 years back? During our times, these are not the subjects, matter of discussion. But why is it so that ethical issues have been gaining ground in contemporary scenario of higher education? Does that mean that those are non-existent in the past and teachers were unethical and higher education system had no concern for ethical issues in the past when you and I were students and research scholars of different university?
I think Professor Behera, this is something which I totally agree with you that that 50 years before we were not talking about ethical issues, and 50 years before everybody was so careful about this whole educational system. I think there are two factors which are responsible. One is the post-colonial state, and in the post-colonial state, how this whole education, because when the colonial system of education was there, the space of ethics was quite minimum, and the colonial education wanted to produce a particular kind of clientele, wanted to produce a particular kind of people, a particular kind of citizens, and the post-colonial education is an attempt to move away from there, and therefore the topic of ethics is coming up. The second point is we are talking of the diversity, that in the new educational system, the diversity is being given an important place, and some of the faculty members have been also asking that how to handle this whole issue of diversity, because the aspiring class is changing very, very rapidly, and for good. That look at, I remember this aspirational class is changing. Now I remember that in 1980s in Delhi there used to be only one coaching institute for civil services, the Rao's IAS Coaching Institute, and it used to be held in Helly Road in a very, very posh and elite area, and Dr. Rao would sit there and will produce the bureaucrats of the country. Now you go to Karol Bagh, and in the Karol Bagh of Delhi, there are mushrooming of educational institutions imparting coaching for IAS and for other examinations, primarily because the aspirational class has expanded. The people have been trying to achieve more and more, and this is because educational system in India has been able to address the whole issue of diversity in a post-colonial state. And finally, I would like to say, as I mentioned earlier, that the neoliberal economy has brought education into the market, and not by the public universities, but by the private universities. And therefore, discussing ethics becomes a kind of protocol, because that ensures the end user satisfaction, and that is something which is very, very important. I totally agree that there was no discussion before 50 years or so when we were the research scholars, but we were very, very ethical, as you know, that we were highly ethical, and as far as the research component is concerned, can I make a personal remark here, that when I was a research scholar, I would go to the library, look for the new books, bring it and discuss with my supervisor. But when I became a supervisor, I started giving the new books to the students. So I felt, who will give me new books at what point of time? That time has still not come. So the whole idea is that the research practices are fast changing. I agree with your point.
Thank you very much, Professor Patnaik, for your wonderful, mesmerizing lecture. I would say that was quite informative and analytical, and we all enjoyed. And we have also learned many things from your stimulating lecture. And on behalf of our university, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to you, and keep on contributing to the body of knowledge. And once again, I would also like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, senior bureaucrats of Department of Higher Education, and our participant, especially the boarding researcher and the entry-level teacher. I'm sure they must have benefited a lot from the presentation of by Somarendra Patnaik. And Professor Patnaik, thank you very much. And this is the end of today's lecture. So, and goodbye.